You need to stop breaking the promises that you make to yourself. Because what you're really doing is building a pattern that will destroy your own perception of the type of person that you want to become. And here's why. Most people are pretty good at keeping promises to other people, but they lack accountability when it comes to themselves. Suddenly, the same people who would never cancel on a colleague will cancel on their own goals, repeatedly, without much thought. Over time, that pattern does something to you that's worth paying attention to. See, every time you break a promise to yourself, even if it's a small one, you're quietly reshaping your own self-perception. And you're conditioning your brain to believe that the promises that you make to yourself don't carry as much weight as they would if they were made to someone else. That mindset builds a habit, and people never realize this is the reason why their goals don't seem to budge, no matter how many times they recommit to them. What people rarely notice is that years of seemingly reasonable exceptions slowly chip away at the relationship that they have with their own follow-through, which is why changing the plan or even the goal itself rarely solves the problem. So, the actual question underneath how do I keep the promises I've made to myself is about what's been making it so easy to break them in the first place. When you think about it, one of the biggest reasons we struggle to commit to our promises is because those promises were made from the wrong priorities and in the wrong emotional state. It's easy to set a goal when you're motivated. The problem comes when you're tired after work or distracted by a big game, or really any reason you'll find to break promises made during moments that don't reflect your everyday reality. What you need to do is find something more durable than motivation, because, contrary to popular belief, motivation is one of the least reliable resources that you have. Now, with that covered, let's examine the size of the promises that you are making. You may tell yourself that you're going to overhaul your entire morning routine, work out 6 days a week, read for an hour every night, and cut out every single thing that isn't serving your goals, all at the same time, and that this time it'll stick. And when you inevitably fall short of that standard, you treat the whole commitment as broken and start over from nothing. I know it's not what anyone wants to hear, but setting sustainable goals will always trump quick fixes. And on top of it, the fact that you are succeeding in building that track record of doing what you said you were going to do, even when what you said was modest, is what eventually creates the foundation for bigger commitments that actually have a chance of sticking. Last but not least, let's talk about what you do right after you break a promise to yourself, because that moment tends to be more consequential than most people treat it as. The default response is usually guilt, followed by an overcompensating recommitment that's even bigger than the original promise, which just starts the same cycle over and over again, from an even worse starting position. A more useful response is to treat the break the same way a good coach would treat an athlete's bad day. That means acknowledging what happened, understanding what actually caused it, making the adjustments necessary so that it is less likely to happen again, and then of course, getting back to the work without letting that stumble mean more than it does. Finally, and maybe most important of all, keeping promises to yourself also requires that what you're promising actually means something to you personally. You have to know yourself, and you have to be honest about what you want, because a lot of people are trying to follow through on goals they adopted from somewhere else, ideas that they borrowed from somewhere that isn't theirs. The problem with that is that the goals that come from comparison, or from external pressure, or from a vague sense of what you're supposed to want, have a completely different feel to them than the goals that arrive from a clear and personal understanding of what you're building towards. That difference shows up most clearly in the moments when keeping the promise is genuinely hard. When you're connected to the real reason behind the commitment, the hard moments have context, and that context makes it a lot easier to push through than raw discipline ever does on its own. At the end of the day, keeping promises to yourself is less about willpower and more about structure. Willpower runs out, especially when life gets busy or difficult or both. But structure doesn't ask you how you're feeling before it shows up. When the behavior is built into your environment and your routine in a way that makes doing it the path of least resistance, You're not relying on yourself to feel like doing it every single time, which changes the math significantly in your favor over the long run. Think of it. The most consistent person you know isn't the one who never breaks the promises they make to themselves. They're the ones who have gotten genuinely good at returning to their commitments quickly and without letting a single miss turn into an extended absence. So, underneath all of this is something pretty straightforward, which is that the relationship that you have with yourself is built the same way every other meaningful relationship is built, through consistency and honesty and showing up even when it would be easier not to. That trust, once it's genuinely there, changes the way you move through decisions, goals, and commitments in a way that's hard to fully appreciate until you've actually felt the difference between operating with it and operating without it. So, if you've been struggling to keep the promises you've made to yourself, the answer probably isn't more motivation or a stronger version of the same commitment you've already broken a few times. It's more likely that the real work is rebuilding the relationship with your own follow through, one kept promise at a time, starting small enough that you can actually win consistently, and letting that compound into something solid enough to eventually build a life on. And this is also tied to how you approach failure, or maybe even worse for some people, embarrassment. Even before you're able to fulfill the promises to yourself consistently, you have to make peace with the fact that you're going to look bad while doing it. There will be a period of time where your efforts don't match your ambitions yet, and that's normal. You'll be a beginner. You'll mess up. For a while, the person you're trying to become will be way ahead of the person you currently are. We talk more about how to deal with this in the video on screen.